Good morning, ladies, and welcome to our study of Esther, the New Spring Study of the Joy of Living. And today is an introduction on the book of Esther. How many of you love a Cinderella story? Well, the Cinderella story is when a person of low stature and importance unexpectedly achieves great success or public recognition. As we are living now in the shadow of 2020, most of us, a Cinderella story would really lift our spirits about now. We may have found ourselves yearning for a word from God and reassurance of His presence to help us make sense of the dark days in which we live in. Augustine said, "Where Scripture speaks, God speaks." And we might be tempted to think God has forgotten us. But through His written word of Esther, we will learn the truth that even before our problems came about, God was at work and He was making provision for us. Ladies, I am so thankful that God has laid it upon your hearts to be a part of this very relevant Old Testament study on Esther, because Esther has been described as a Cinderella story. The story of an orphaned Jewish girl who rises to become the Queen of Persia during a dark but crucial time for the Jews. The difference between the Cinderella folklore story that we may have grown up with and the story of Esther is that Esther is a story of faith, and that God used her faith in order to save her people. Mark Dever described Esther as the longest sustained illustration of the verse Romans 8:28. And Paul said, "And we know that all things God works for the good of those who love Him and who have been called according to His purpose." Throughout the book of Esther, God's hand of providence and protection on His people is evident, even though His name is never mentioned. Can you imagine a book of the Bible where God never is mentioned? Esther reminds us that even when circumstances appear out of control, God is both watching and working for our good. Today, God is inviting you to become involved with Him in His work. So ladies, let's open with a word of prayer. Father, we just praise You as the invincible, loving, watching God, that You are always present and You are always at work. And I pray today through this introduction of Esther that You would open our eyes to see and to hear a word from You, from a book where Your name is not even mentioned. Lord, challenge us today to join You in Your work. And we ask these things in Your name. Amen. As I said, this is an introduction to the book of Esther. And we welcome new ladies. Maybe you're joining the Joy of Living Bible study for the very first time. And I would just like to go over a couple of ways in which the Joy of Living encourages us to grow in the grace and the knowledge of our Lord. And it does it in 4 different ways. And as a teacher, teaching is always the best way to learn something is through repetition. So the Joy of Living helps us do that. And the first part of the Joy of Living is our personal study in God's Word. The second part of that is in our small group sharing and our fellowship. And I know this area has especially been a challenge. because we are having to meet in people's homes. We're meeting at church and having to follow the COVID guidelines. But again, that's just a challenge that God can overcome. The third thing is the lecture, and I love to be in person teaching, but obviously that's not how it has worked out for us this last semester and now. But Lord, again, God has provided and worked through the situation and has provided us this wonderful facility and backdrop and just a great way in order to get the lecture out effectively. And lastly, The Joy of Living gives us a great set of commentary notes on the book of Esther. Let's review a little bit and go all the way back because the Bible itself is a unified, redemptive story where Christ is the focus and the hero. And even though we're doing an Old Testament study, Christ is still the hero behind the scenes. In Vaughan Roberts' book, and it's called God's Big Picture, he summarizes the Bible is a story of God's people in God's place under God's rules and blessing. And your notes this week do a great job of taking a couple of pages to review God's big picture. And it takes us back to Genesis when God makes a call and a promise to Abraham. And from that one man, a family grows into a nation. And that nation is called Israel. And Israel is then given God's laws, and the nation grows into a kingdom. It is a story of God's faithfulness and blessing, but it's also a story of Israel's disobedience and rebellion. So what we see throughout the Bible and the Old Testament is this cycle. God is faithful and he blesses. Israel is disobedient. God then must discipline them. And under that discipline, Israel repents, and then God delivers and blesses. So today, where does Esther fit in God's redemptive story? So number one on your handout is that Esther does fit in God's redemptive story, and we're going to see how that does. The first one is that it is a slice of history when the Jews are living in exile in Persia because they have been removed from God's place because they refuse to submit to God's rule. It fits in the Old Testament between chapters 6 and 7 of Ezra, when the very first wave of Jews were permitted to return to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. However, there were many Jews that chose not to go back to Jerusalem and to stay in Persia for a variety of reasons. And that's where we find the setting of Esther. Esther and Mordecai are just some of the Jews that decided to stay in Persia rather than to go back to Jerusalem. In Esther, we will see that even after Israel had been unfaithful to God, God remains faithful, preserving a people for his name's sake. If you're like me, one of my favorite kinds of books are historical fiction, because the storyline takes me back to a setting located in the past. It's almost like getting into a machine and it taking you back in time. The Bible is made up of a variety of different kinds of literature, and Esther is classified as a historical narrative. And it takes us back to 500 to 400 BC. And it's a story of drama and suspense that draws its readers to anticipate events that often are the opposite of what they expected. Number 2 on your paper is who wrote Esther? Well, we don't know. Whoever the author, he had great knowledge of the Persian and Jewish culture and customs of that day. And he also goes to great lengths to document real places, names, and events in order to prove its historical value. And it's not just a good moral story. Of course, we know that all scripture is God-breathed. So it is not just a good moral story, and he proves that. Some guesses who wrote the book of Esther are Mordecai himself, maybe Ezra the scribe, or Nehemiah, and some believe that maybe a younger contemporary of Mordecai may have written it. But regardless, this is one of the mysteries of God that we can look forward to knowing in heaven. Number 3 on your paper is what can we learn about God in the book of Esther? We will see God's power and his presence at work through the lives of 5 main characters. And these characters are divided into 2 groups. There are the enemies of God, and there are the worshipers of God. And those worshipers of God become the heroes of the story. Esther has been said to be a preview of Revelation, of the book of Revelation. That the book of Esther is so relevant for us today because we can easily relate to these characters. So the very first character that we're going to meet is King Xerxes. That is his Persian name. He was the son of Darius the Great, who ruled the Persian Empire at the zenith or the pinnacle. And he ruled for 21 years from 486 BC until he was assassinated in 465 BC. At the beginning of Esther, he is in just the first few years of his reign. Now, history remembers King Xerxes from his strong military accomplishments and the completion of this lavish and opulent palace complex that his father had begun in Susa. So that will be our setting next week in chapter 1 of Esther. But history also remembers him as a man of an emotional extremes. His actions were often strong and contradictory. So in today's terms, he would be labeled probably a narcissist and someone who was bipolar. The second character we meet is Queen Vashti in chapter 1. She is a strong-willed, independent thinking woman who is unafraid to go against the wishes of her husband, the king. So you can obviously, she's a very contemporary, modern woman. The third character we meet is the villain of the story, and that's Haman. He is a wealthy, influential officer in the court of the king. But we will also discover that he's deceitful, he's arrogant, and he is a servant of the king whose actions jeopardize and threaten God's people. The fourth character we're going to see is Mordecai, one of the heroes of the story. He was a God-fearing Jew from the tribe of Benjamin, and he is living in exile in Persia. He becomes the deliverer of God's people as in 2 ways, just as a low-level official in the Persian government, but mainly by his relationship with the 5th most important character, and that is Esther herself. So Esther, her Persian name, her Jewish name was Hadassah. And Esther, as a little girl, lost both of her parents and was raised by her cousin Mordecai. God used Esther, this lowly Jewish girl living in exile in the affluent land of Persia. And God also used her beauty to capture the attention of a cruel, bipolar king and then to deliver God's people. So she is definitely seen as a heroine for God. You know, what's unique about Esther, again, is that God is never named. Yet he holds center stage as the ultimate deliverer of the story. You know, how is God at work? You know, we can relate to the characters in Esther. We certainly, absolutely can. You know, there are world and local leaders who are power hungry, manipulative, and impulsive, just like King Xerxes and Haman. And then we could also relate to Esther and Mordecai, who are just ordinary, imperfect, yet available so that God could use them in his plans. You know, throughout the Bible, God intervenes to accomplish his purposes. And sometimes he chooses to do that through miracles. In the Old Testament, just in the book of Exodus, God chose to work through plagues. He chose to part the Red Sea in order to deliver Moses and the Israelites from Egypt. But in Esther, he does something different. God chooses to work silently and invisibly behind the scenes through people's ordinary decisions and actions, and in just the mundane order of life in order to overcome impossible circumstances. Bible scholar Landon Dowden says Esther will resonate with us because we as believers today, most of us aren't able to walk on water. And most of us haven't been used to raise someone from the dead. But we are just average, ordinary people who are striving to serve the Lord. So God accomplishes his gracious purposes sovereignly through assisted circumstances. Now, assisted circumstances would probably be called what we would say a coincidence. A coincidence. And Esther is full of those. Just a couple of examples. Esther just happens to be Jewish and beautiful. She just happens to be favored by the eunuchs of the king's court and the king himself. Mordecai just happened to be in a place to overhear the assassination plot against the king. When Haman plots his revenge and he throws the dice to make a decision, that just happens to indicate a date that is put off for almost a year. And the gallows Haman built for Mordecai just happened to be ready to hang him. There are so many more coincidences, but what they show in the events in Esther are that they are not determined by chance and luck, but by God who directs all things, both good and evil, toward his purposes. Has there ever been some event, blessing, or comfort or guidance that you knew was God's work, but God didn't audibly speak to you or perform a miracle to accomplish whatever it was? Most of us would say, absolutely. You can think of an example. I know many years ago, my husband was on a mission trip to India, and he was the only medical person that was going to work on people with dental needs. And they planned and organized things for several months to get ready for that trip. When he got there, he realized that the needs were so great. And he just wondered, and he asked God, how in the world am I going to take care of the needs of so many people here? Well, there just happened to be a dental school right next door to where they had set up the clinic. And a few dentists that were going to school next door just happened to come over to see what they were doing in this clinic. And that just began the whole thing of God providing. He didn't provide in a miracle, and my husband didn't get an audible word from God, but God provided through the work of those Indian dentists who just happened to come over to see what was going on. And they happened to work on the lowest caste of people that they normally would have never worked on. And God met the need of the day. So most of us would say, yes, of course. If we are focusing more on God rather than our circumstances, we will be more apt to recognize that God is very much at work around us. You know, we just finished celebrating Christmas, and I thought of a story of the man named Simeon, who is described as a righteous and devout Jew who was eagerly awaiting for the Messiah to come. And Luke tells us in the gospel that one day that the Holy Spirit led him to the temple. And it just happened to be the day that Mary and Joseph came to present baby Jesus to the Lord. And scripture says in Luke 2 that Simeon was there, and he took the child in his arms, and he praised God because he saw the Lord's Messiah just as he had promised him. Ladies, are you eagerly waiting and looking for the Messiah in your life? Just a few things for us to consider at the very bottom of your page is, how can the book of Esther challenge us? I think one of the best ways is that we are comforted in the dark times in which we live. And we're comforted because Esther will teach us that God is at work. But he is also asking us and calling us to join him in that work. How many coincidences, when you look back in your life, turned out to be significant? Can you see how he was at work, even when you may have been asleep? Or maybe it was a time of your life where you had wandered from the Lord. 2 Timothy 2:13 says, if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. Today, when God shows you where he is at work, will you be willing to join him in that work? The second challenge, I think, today is for us to be courageous in obedience. God calls his people to be active servants, not complacent onlookers. And we're going to see how Esther and Mordecai were drawn into a situation where they had to actively do something. Do you believe that God can make a hero of you? And to be a hero of God requires us to surrender to him, and it may require us to take risk. So are you ready to risk your life to obey God? Is self-protection more important than doing God's mission? And I think the last challenge for us today is to be confident with joyful hope. Charles Spurgeon said, every child of God is where God has placed him for some purpose. That is definitely the story of Esther. You know, as Christians today, we face real problems, but God's word reminds us that God is our deliverer and He is the solution to our problems. As a hero for God, again, are you willing to risk time and safety and effort to be a part of the solution rather than wringing our hands and looking at the problem in these dark days? I'd like to end this morning with a hymn, which if you're new to Bible study, I usually do end with a hymn. And today is Immortal, Invisible, God Only Wise. It's an old hymn that was written in the 1800s. And the words read as this: Immortal, invisible, God only wise, in light inaccessible, hid from our eyes, most blessed, most glorious, the Ancient of Days, almighty, victorious, thy great name we praise. Unresting, unhasting, and silent is light, nor wanting nor wasting, thou rulest in might. Thy justice like mountains high soaring above, the clouds which are fountains of goodness and love. To all life thou givest, to both great and small, and all life thou livest, the true life of all. We blossom and flourish as leaves on a tree, and wither and perish, but naught changeth thee. Great Father of glory, pure Father of light, thine angels adore thee, all veiling their sight. All praise we would render. O help us to see, 'tis only the splendor of light hideth thee. Have a great week in the Lord, ladies.